of the dawn, when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong, in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the bold are drowned in mournful cries. Oh, we dreamt of a home where the rivers run free. Now we walk on the ruins of what was meant to be, shattered hopes and broken streams.
As the sun rose high in the sky, it cast its golden rays across Muguland, a land that was once a flourishing area filled with great natural resources. The Muguland area is home to over 250 distinct tribes, each with its own unique cultures, languages, and traditions. These tribes often fought intertribal wars against each other, but for most times they had learned to live in relative harmony, with occasional wars erupting every now and then. Despite the intertribal conflicts, the people of Muguland areas managed to develop advanced civilizations and complex social structures long before the arrival of European explorers. They had a flourishing economy, driven by the abundance of natural resources found in their lands. The area now known as Muguland was known for its oil, gas, and minerals, which were the envy of other nations. The people of Muguland were highly intelligent and industrious. They were experts in agriculture, mining, and trade, and their kingdoms once ruled vast swaths of Africa. They developed advanced political, economic, and social systems that were suited to their individual tribes, with each tribe having its own unique way of governance. Despite their differences, the people of Muguland were united by a shared desire to make their lands great. They had a strong sense of community and a deep respect for their traditions and cultural heritage. They were proud of their land, and they worked hard to make it thrive. The pre-colonial era of Muguland was a time of great progress and prosperity, but it was also a time of conflict and division. The tribes were separated by their ancient, wall-less but mutually acknowledged boundaries. As with all humans, they often fought over resources. But despite this, they all recognized the importance of working together to develop their part of the world. In the pre-colonial era, most of the Muguland area was not one country or one nation, but a collection of small nations defined by deep tribal cleavages. Each tribe had its own distinct political, social, and economic structure within the larger areas of land they all inhabited. Despite the frequent intertribal wars, the people of Muguland thrived and developed advanced civilizations, including complex systems of governance, trade, and agriculture. The tribes of Muguland were known for their exceptional skills in agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. They traded with other neighboring tribes and countries, and their goods were highly sought after in the African continent. Some of the ethnic groups had even developed sophisticated irrigation systems that helped them cultivate crops all year round, making Muguland the breadbasket of Africa. The different tribes of Muguland also had complex social structures that were shaped by their traditions and customs. Each tribe had its own unique set of laws and practices that governed their daily lives, and these were passed down from generation to generation. Despite their differences, the tribes of Muguland had found ways to coexist and maintain peaceful relations with one another. They recognized the value of trade and commerce, and this helped to build strong relationships between the different tribes. It was not uncommon for people from the different tribes to intermarry, and this further strengthened the bonds between them. The Muguland area was also rich in natural resources such as oil, gas, and over 500 minerals, including diamond, uranium, bitumen, and many other minerals the world would desperately need as global development continued to evolve. Many people in the African continent believed that Muguland had the potential to become the most prosperous nation in Africa with its vast resources and talented people. The peoples of Muguland were a proud people with a deep sense of history and culture, and they were determined to make their lands a place of peace and prosperity. However, these hopes would soon be shattered by the arrival of colonial powers seeking to exploit Muguland's resources for their own benefit. The coming of the Europeans would mark the beginning of a dark period in Muguland's history, a period that would change the tribes forever.
The day the Europeans arrived in the Abadarigi area of Muguland was etched in the memories of the locals, not just for the sight of the strange ships, but for the amusing tale of Omugo Kokontari, the village dimwit and buffoon. As the first ship anchored, Omugo, known for his dramatic antics, was the first to spot the spirits. His eyes wide with terror, he sprinted through the village, screaming, "The gods have come! They are here to punish us for Mwiti's goat that I mean someone stole last week." His words spread like wildfire, causing a mix of laughter and fear among the villagers. Omuga with his clothes disheveled and his speech a jumbled mess of superstitions and apologies for sins not committed, dashed to the king's palace. The king of Abadarigi Kingdom, amused yet curious, listened to Omugo's exaggerated tale. "Mighty king," the village dimwit gasped. "They are tall, with skin like the moonlight and eyes like the deep sea. They speak in thunderous tones, and their clothes shine like the sun." The king, trying to stifle his laughter, convened his council. Amidst the council's serious deliberations, Omugo Kokantari's story became a light-hearted moment, easing the tension. After much deliberation, the king, sitting with his war council, finally decided to send his trusted chief, Abijah Arubiefin, the topmost warrior in the land, to lead a delegation to the sea to see what the drama was all about and to welcome the people now being addressed as distant visitors from the gods. As the Europeans emerged from their ships, the reality was far less mystical than Omugo's description. However, their strange attire and unfamiliar language indeed sparked wonder among the Mugulanders. The Europeans were dressed in strange clothes, armed with advanced weapons, and spoke in a language that was incomprehensible to the locals. The chieftain of the Abadarigi tribe, approaching them, asked in a cautious tone, "From where do you hail, and what brings you to Abadarigi?" Their response, a mix of gestures and broken words, hinted at peaceful intentions. But the wise chieftain Abijah remained skeptical, but accorded them the traditional courtesies and hospitality that the people of the Abadarigi were known for all over Muguland. The visitors were eventually taken to the king's palace, and after the usual feasting and singing, the European visitors were then given a place to stay as the people of Abadarigi tried to figure out what they want and how to better communicate and interact with them. Days turned into weeks as the Europeans began to trade, initially with novel spices, trinkets and gadgets the people had never seen before. The Mugulanders, fascinated by these novelties, exchanged them for their own precious resources. Ojuri, a keen observer, remarked to his friends, "Beware, these men may smile, but their eyes are like those of a hungry lion." The Europeans, on the other hand, saw an opportunity to exploit the land and its people for their own gain. They started to trade with the locals, exchanging spices, trinkets, and other coveted items by the locals for valuable resources like gold, ivory, and slaves. As the Europeans established trade relationships with the various kingdoms around the Muguland areas, they also started to spread their religion and culture, building churches and schools to convert the locals to Christianity and European ways of life. Though initially startled by some of the strange practices of these Europeans, the people of Muguland areas, in awe of the Europeans and their advanced ways, started to abandon their own traditions and beliefs, adopting those of their new masters. The visitors, taking advantage of the gullibility of the locals who saw them as superior human beings because of their color and their superior ships and ammunitions, used all sorts of tactics to convince many of the locals that their gods and local practices were backward and unable to save them or lead them to any progress. They showcased their own cultural, social and religious practices with great fanfare and used every opportunity to sow into the minds of the locals that their ways were better than the ways of the locals. However, not all kingdoms were that easily swayed by the Europeans' influence. Some kings and leaders, recognizing the threat that the Europeans posed to their autonomy, religion and way of life, started resisting their encroachment on their lands and traditions. Some of the more perceptive leaders clearly saw the Europeans as a threat to their way of life and the stability of their kingdoms, and tried to warn their kinsmen of the looming danger. Despite this resistance, the Europeans continued to spread their influence across the different kingdoms of Muguland, bringing with them new technologies and ideas that would change the face of the lands forever. As the European explorers continued to venture deeper into Muguland areas, they became dumbfounded about the abundance of resources the land had to offer. The fertile soil was perfect for growing crops, and the rivers teemed with fishes. In addition, the land was rich in minerals such as gold, copper and iron. Seeing the potential for profit, the European nations began to establish trading outposts in the region. At first, the Europeans were seen by most, other than the few who were already getting concerned by their presence, as benevolent traders exchanging goods and establishing peaceful relationships with the local tribes. However, as time went on, their true intentions became clear. The European powers had a deep interest in slave trade and saw the Muguland people as a valuable source of labor. At first, they purchased the slaves they needed from the local leaders and other victorious warriors, who often brought back the able-bodied men from the war front as spoils of war. Eventually, the Europeans wanted more and more slaves for their plantations abroad, wanted better deals for their purchases, and thus decided to control their own source of slaves. With their superior weapons of war, it was easy to go into the slave trade business directly and capture their own slaves in wars they often deliberately provoked. So they not only bought slaves that were being bought and sold by the locals in open markets, they also instigated slave acquisition expeditions in several areas of Africa. The slave trade consequently got bigger as the Europeans discovered new worlds that needed free or cheap manpower to develop. People from Africa, including the Muguland areas, then became precious commodities to ship across the seas to work on plantations in the Americas and other parts of the world. The Europeans also sought to deepen their hold on the land by establishing colonial rule. They used their military might to force many of the Muguland tribes to cede their land or enter into forced treaties for peace. And in many cases, they manipulated the local tribes to fight against one another, further weakening their hold on the land. The European powers, as their influence in the area grew, expanded their presence by imposing their own laws, customs and traditions on the Muguland peoples, often ruthlessly suppressing their cultural heritage and sense of identity. They made their ability to enslave people in the Muguland areas more permanent by convincing the people to hate their local gods, to discard their ancient cultures and practices in favor of the European culture. They also deliberately created and fostered an environment that would make the elites in the Muguland tribes covet visiting Europe, and deliberately elevated those who could dress, speak and act like Europeans to top positions in the Muguland areas. So it was that in just a few generations, the European way of life, their culture, their religions, their social lifestyles and educational system became the gold standard for the peoples and tribes in the Muguland areas. Noting that many in these new areas were very superstitious and very religious, they attacked their sense of spiritual harmony by portraying their traditional religions as evil and incapable of saving or helping the people. Even speaking with local native tongues and accents was portrayed as an exhibition of illiteracy, while those who could speak with European accents became the new elites in the society. Before long, it became a mark of highest education and privilege among the peoples of Muguland to speak in the language, accent and tone of the Europeans. It was only in retrospect that many of the people realized that this was a deliberate and calculated attempt to permanently rob the locals of their spiritual, social and cultural identity, and to make them permanently dependent on European ways of life, even after freedom and post-independence from the calculating Europeans. Even to this day, despite virtually all areas of Muguland and Africa having been granted independence, the European ways of life, of thought and of religion still dominated every area of life in the independent countries of Africa, including Muguland. Meanwhile, as the Europeans turned from seemingly benevolent visitors seeking to trade with the local to heavy-handed occupiers and taskmasters, many of the Muguland peoples remained resilient, fighting for their independence and struggling against the yoke of colonial rule. Through decades of diplomatic struggle, civil unrests, occasional riots, and waning authority of the European non-donors worldwide, the Muguland people eventually gained their independence from the non-don Europeans without having to fight a long war of independence as most people in other areas of Africa had to do. But the scars of colonialism remained and continue to affect the country's political, economic and social development for years to come, even to this day. However, more details of all the Europeans did in the Muguland areas and beyond is for another day, as we go back to the beginning of the conquest of Muguland and the immediate consequences for the peoples of the conquered area. The non-donors' conquest of the Muguland areas. The non-don Europeans who had settled in the Muguland areas eventually stopped pretending that they were just traders and started conquering most of the Muguland areas to establish their colonial outposts. They tricked or coerced many of the chiefs and rulers from the Yorubawa and Awasa tribes to sign treaties with them that ultimately gave them the rights to govern them and their peoples. The Europeans promised the unsuspecting and mostly greedy local rulers and their elite citizens that they would help them expand their kingdoms and promised them greater power and influence. They also bribed some of the traditional rulers with gifts and other incentives to get them to accept European rule. As a result, many of the chiefs and rulers gave in to European pressure and allowed them to take control of their lands. However, the Okorobia tribe was the only major tribe who resisted the Europeans, They saw the Europeans as a threat to their way of life and were determined to fight them. The Okorobia tribe fiercely resisted the invaders, and their people suffered greatly as the Europeans made sure they paid in blood and land devastation for their opposition. The invaders marched inland, killing many of the Okorobia people, burning villages and destroying crops. In addition to using superior firepower to take control of territories in Muguland, the Europeans also utilized a trading company known as the Royal Muguland Company to acquire large expanses of land under the guise of foreign trade. Many of the traditional rulers in the Muguland area were enticed by the potential economic benefits promised by the company and signed treaties with the Europeans, ultimately giving up their rights to govern their people. As the Royal Muguland Company expanded its operations and acquired more land, its owners eventually handed over control to the Queen of the Non-Don Empire. This marked the beginning of the direct Non-Don Empire's colonial rule over Muguland, which would last for more than half a century. Despite continued fierce resistance from some of the tribes, the Europeans were eventually able to conquer most of Muguland, creating a system of colonialism that would last for several decades. They introduced their culture and way of life and sought to change the traditional ways of the people. They imposed new laws and taxes and forced the people to work in the mines and on the plantations. The Muguland people were forced to work for low wages or no pay at all, and their resources were exploited for the benefit of the European colonizers. The Muguland people, once self-governed and flourishing, were now subjected to foreign rule and exploitation of their natural resources. In the end, the Muguland people became deeply affected by the European conquest, and it would take many years for them to regain their independence and self-governance. The Europeans left behind a legacy of political, social, and economic inequality that still affects most of the tribes in Muguland today. In this episode, we will see how the Royal Muguland Company sold out to the Non-Don Kingdom's government, and how they used state might to consolidate its holdings in a vast territory it controlled by deploying its people to rule over the areas of Muguland and exiling those who protested. As the Non-Don Empire government took control of the vast territories it had acquired through the Royal Muguland Company, they quickly realized that they had inherited a land filled with various tribes, cultures and traditions. The Europeans saw the Muguland people as misfits and savages, and they felt they needed to be brought under one umbrella for ease of administration. The European government started imposing their own rules, systems and culture on the people, often at the expense of their native ways of life. They brought in their own officials to administer the territories, leading to a situation where the Muguland people felt more alienated than ever. The Muguland people were not prepared for the changes that came with the new government. The Europeans tried to enforce new laws, new taxes, and new rules that the people had never heard of before. This led to widespread protests, and many people were exiled, imprisoned, or even killed for opposing the new regime. The Non-Don Empire saw the Muguland people as inferior, and they treated them as such. They used their might to suppress any form of dissent and ensured the Muguland people were kept under control at all times. The Muguland people were now a new nation of misfits, ruled by a foreign power that had little understanding or respect for their culture or way of life. The Muguland people quickly realized that they were being oppressed and exploited by their new rulers. They saw how their natural resources were being exploited, their land taken away from them, and their traditions trampled on. The Muguland people began to yearn for the days when they were free and independent, and they started organizing themselves to resist foreign rule. As the Governor-General looked out over the diverse landscape of the different tribes that had been brought together under one colonial rule, he couldn't help but wonder what to call this new country. He had tried different names, but none seemed to capture the essence of the people and the land. One day he was lying in bed with his mistress, a European woman of easy virtue whom he had grown fond of, and he asked her what she thought they should name the new territories. She thought for a moment and then smiled. Since they are already calling themselves Mugus, why not call it Muguland? The Governor-General was awestruck by the simplicity and humour of the name, and it quickly caught on among the colonial officials and the local people. Soon, the name Muguland rung throughout the country, and it became the official name of the colony. Despite the humour in the name, it also reflected the complex and diverse nature of the new nation. Muguland was a melting pot of different tribes and cultures united under one colonial rule, and while the name may have been given in jest, it soon became a source of pride for the people of Muguland, who had been brought together under one name for the first time in their history. It is important to note that the people of Muguland, despite being brought together as a country, did not necessarily have a sense of national identity or loyalty to the country. They still identified strongly with their respective tribes and had vastly different cultural, social and economic orientations. Additionally, there were historical tension and conflicts between the different tribes, making it challenging to build a sense of unity and shared purpose as a nation. This divide between the tribes of Muguland was further widened by the policies of the colonial government, which often pitted one tribe against another for their own benefit. For example, the colonial government favoured the Awosas and gave them more opportunities for education and employment, which created resentment and envy from the other tribes. Even after gaining independence, Muguland will remain divided along tribal lines. Political parties were formed along tribal lines, and each tribe tried to gain power and resources for themselves at the expense of others. The government was seen as being corrupt, with leaders enriching themselves and their tribesmen at the expense of the generality of the people in the country. This led to deep-seated animosity between the tribes, with each tribe accusing the others of marginalizing them and not giving them a fair share of the national resources. The lack of national unity and identity made it difficult for the country to progress, as each tribe was focused on its own interests rather than the development of the nation as a whole. The forced merger of the fiercely independent tribes making up the Muguland area had sown the seeds of the future ruination of a promising country.
The Nondon government divided Muguland into regions and gave the locals some autonomy to run their regions as they prepared for independence. This led to great positive competition, as the three major regions of the West, East and North tried to outdo each other in development and social programs. In the West, Chief Obafeso Awolowo of the Yorubawa tribe spearheaded an ambitious education program, building schools and making education accessible to all. The region became known for its high literacy rates and produced some of the best educated people in the country. He also prioritized industrialization, setting up factories and creating jobs for the people. The region became a hub for manufacturing, and the people prospered. Chief Awolowo quickly distinguished himself and his region by embarking on a string of firsts in the development of the blossoming Muguland, even as some of the political leaders started agitating for complete independence from the Nondon government. He created the first radio station in Muguland and shortly thereafter the first television station in Muguland. In addition, realizing that the education of his people is critical for progress in the coming years, he introduced free education at all levels and made it a crime for parents not to send their children to school. These strings of progressive initiatives quickly sparked envy and healthy competition from the other regions of Muguland. In the east, Chief Nyana Zikizi of Okorobia led his people to focus on infrastructure, building roads and bridges that connected remote villages and towns to the rest of the region. The east soon became the transportation hub of the country, and commerce thrived. In the north, the regent of the Awosa tribe, a wise and just leader, focused on agriculture. He encouraged his people to focus on farming and cattle rearing that had been their strength for hundreds of years, and the region became the breadbasket of the country, producing most of the food consumed in Muguland. The region also created the biggest groundnut and rice pyramids the world has ever seen. The competition among the regions was healthy at the early stages, and each region's progress was an inspiration to the others. The people were united in their goal of making Muguland a great country, and they worked hard to achieve it. In a bid not to be outdone, the Okorobia region quickly followed suit, setting up their own radio and television stations, which quickly became popular with their own unique programs and shows. The Yorubawa and Okorobia regions became known for their healthy rivalry, always competing to come up with innovative ideas and programs to attract viewers and listeners. This healthy competition led to the growth of the media industry in Muguland, with the regions developing a reputation for producing some of the best television shows, movies and music on the continent. As a result, people from other regions started to take notice and began to emulate their example, leading to the development of a thriving entertainment industry in Muguland. In addition to the groundnut pyramids in the north and the cocoa economy in the west, the Awosa in the north also developed a thriving textile industry, while the Okorobia continued to focus on their core agricultural products such as yam and palm oil, as well as developing a strong textile trade. Each region developed its own unique strengths and competitive advantages, which contributed to the overall growth and development of Muguland as a whole. In the western region of Muguland, Chief Obafeso Awolowo's government established the first television station in the country, which became a major source of entertainment for the people. In addition, his government invested heavily in the cocoa industry, leading to an increase in exports and a thriving economy. The government also focused on education and established the first university in the country. Meanwhile, in the eastern region, Chief Nana Zikizi's government was focused on building a robust agricultural sector. The region's major cash crop was palm oil, and they invested heavily in the production and export of the product. In the Awosa region to the north, the regent of Awosa tribe was focused on improving infrastructure and transportation. The region was known for its groundnut production, and the government invested heavily in creating better roads and railways to improve the transportation of goods from the north to the different parts of the country. Finally, in the northern region, the government invested in creating a thriving textile industry centered around cotton production. Overall, the competition among the regions spurred development and progress across Muguland, setting the stage for the country's eventual independence. Hope kept rising that Muguland was on its way to becoming the springboard for the whole of Africa, becoming major players on the world stage as soon as the expected full independence was granted to Muguland. In the east, Chief Nana Zikizi established a strong education system with emphasis on scientific and technical education, leading to the establishment of a technical college in the region. In the west, Chief Obafeso Awolowo established a network of roads and bridges to connect the region, making transportation and trade easier. Meanwhile, in the northern parts, the region of Awosa region invested heavily in the development of irrigation systems for their farmlands, leading to increased agricultural output. In the western region of Muguland, Chief Obafeso Awolowo's government established the first television station in the country, which became a major source of entertainment and education for the people. In addition, his government invested heavily in the cocoa industry, leading to an increase in exports and a thriving economy. Meanwhile, in the eastern region, Chief Nana Zikizi's government was focused on building a robust agricultural sector. The region's major cash crop was palm oil, and they invested heavily in the production and export of the product. Finally, in the northern region, while every other region was busy focusing on educating and developing their population, the leaders held fast to their feudal system. They still forbade women from going to school and did not teach most of their youths Western education. Instead, they focused on teaching Sharia education and encouraged the Yurimanji caste for their children, which turned most of them into beggars on the streets, with no formal education in anything modern but the ancient practices of the tribes. While the West and the East were busy competing for who would be the first to modernize their regions in everything else, the North focused on ingratiating themselves to the non-Don representatives and stuck to their nomadic cattle-rearing ways. Overall, the competition among the regions spurred development and progress across most of Muguland, especially in the East and West, setting the stage for the country's eventual independence. However, the lingering development in the North was to play a significant part in the chaos that eventually erupted after independence. Meanwhile, in the east, Chief Nana Zikizi established a strong education system with emphasis on scientific and technical education, leading to the establishment of a technical college in the region. In the west, Chief Obafeso Awolowo established a network of roads and bridges to connect the region, making transportation and trade easier. Meanwhile, in the mid-north, the regent of Awosa tribe invested heavily in the development of irrigation systems for their farmlands, leading to increased agricultural output. As the regions continued to compete with each other in development and progress, there were occasional tensions and conflicts between the different tribes, especially during political campaigns and elections. Overall, the healthy competition among the regions propelled the country towards rapid development and progress, and the people of Muguland looked forward to the day when they would finally gain their independence and take full control of their own destiny.
We were children of the dawn when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the boy